On the day that followed, they crossed a lake of gypsum, so fine the ponies left no track upon it. The riders wore masks of bone black smeared about their eyes, and some had black the eyes of their horses. The sun reflected off the pan, burned the undersides of their faces, and shadow of horse and rider alike were painted upon the fine white powder in purest indigo. Far out on the desert to the north, dust spouts rose wobbling and augured the earth. And some said they'd heard of pilgrims borne aloft like dervishes in those mindless coils to be dropped broken and bleeding upon the desert again, and there perhaps to watch the thing that had destroyed them lurch outward, onward, like some drunken gin, and resolve itself once more into the elements from which it sprang. Out of that whirlwind no voice spoke, and the pilgrim lying in his broken bones may cry out, and in his anguish he may rage, but rage at what? And if the dried and blackened shell of him is found among the sands by travelers to come, yet who can discover the engine of his room? Hi, JVH.
Hi, Candy. How
How
are
are you?
you?
I'm good. It's been a while. We both
It's
said,
been
how are
so
you?
long.
Well, we
Yeah,
do. We care because it's been a while. We've both been super busy. Like life has been, we had things to do, jobs to do.
been very, very busy. Yeah, but we've been waiting, or we've been planning this one for a
Oh,
while.
we
We've
have.
reading and rereading the chapter.
Yeah, I probably read it about 3 or 4 times. So I went to the East Coast. And I mean, that didn't really, we just had things that we just couldn't line up. But I went to the East Coast. It was very nice. I was helping a friend dog sit, and a girlfriend came with me, and we spent time in Connecticut. We ate all the pizza in the world, and we went to New York City, and you're going to be a little jealous. We saw Othello,
Oh my God.
starring Denzel Washington and Jake
Oh, really?
Hall. Yeah. And I mean, both of them were incredible. We had amazing seats. It's just, I can't even believe it happened. I look at the playbill and I'm like, yeah, I did go. It's interesting though, because Jake Gyllenhaal almost stole the play. He played Iago.
Oh, really? I was
And
gonna
of course
ask you.
yeah, of course that made me think of The Judge. And you're going, why did they put this play on right now? What's with Othello? And I mean, Denzel played him very smart. They had it in contemporary dress. But you've got a guy who keeps tricking, he lies, he cheats, he fools everybody around him, and they all believe him. Oh, right, that's why they did this.
A sociopath tricking everyone.
Right. And he was so good because you kind of cared about him. He had great energy, Gyllenhaal, and he would do his little, bullshit gaslighting with everybody. And then he'd be on the stage by himself and he'd turn to the audience and go, eh. And everybody laughed, of course, because we're watching him trick everybody. So it was
Right.
very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
the Iago's motiveless malignancy or something like that. That
yeah,
does kind of fit the judge.
it does seem to, yeah. And how about you? I know you did a conference.
I think I did like three
Three?
conferences in a row,
Oh my God.
and I've been saddled with really annoying administrative work at
What?
my department,
Mm-hmm.
kind of make work sort of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been longing to get back to
Me
the
too.
stuff that I love.
Me too. And I did a conference too, and I tried to tell everybody to listen to our podcast. If you need anybody, if you have any students that need to listen to a Blood Meridian podcast or friends or readers, yeah. So it is good to be back. I'm pretty excited. A very challenging chapter. A lot goes on, and there's a lot of like patterns in here, I thought. Uh,
Yes. Yeah,
yeah.
a lot of the same kind of motifs and
Mm,
themes are being reworked in new ways. Like it's really great to see just the because we're doing it chapter by chapter and we
mm.
reread the chapter like three or four times, but and so we really get that amazing sense of the work that is going in each of these
Definitely.
chapters.
And
It's great.
foreshadowing, if you will, sometimes too. I just want to make a
Yes.
quick fix it. I screwed up in the past. We talked about Hudibras, probably in episode 7. We talked about Hickus Docus being in that poem. And that's a poem that was incredibly popular for 150 years. And in fact, the term ignis fatuus is in it as well. But
Yes.
I confused it with another There's two of them.
Yeah, so yeah, there's Samuel Butler, restoration poet of
Yeah.
the 17th century, and then there's Samuel Butler, Victorian novelist of the 19th century.
How
And
dare
so
them?
we may like is there a mention of the way of all flesh
I
in
think
Blood
that's what I
Meridian?
said. Yeah, I made the mistake. I thought it was the same
But
person.
I also thought it was the same person, and
Yeah.
we like just kind of disambiguated that like just last week or something,
Yeah, thank
because
you.
like yeah, you had mentioned Hudibras before,
Mhm.
and then when I was looking at the OED definition of ignis fatuus, I did notice that there was a quotation from that same poem, ignis fatuus, foolish fire,
That's
is the way,
right. Right.
and so I started like looking into the poem a little bit. I'm not really familiar. Like you also illuminated for me that Butler takes that name from a very, very minor character in the Fairy Queen book
Right.
two.
Right.
Um, like so, and then I started reading a little bit about the poem. I definitely will be getting into the poem in the very near future, but I started thinking, well, because now that's two mentions of, or two
Hmm.
allusions to this Samuel Butler of the 17th century.
Right.
And it's a restoration poem. It's a kind of like a mock heroic epic, uh, showing kind of the folly of the military mindset, but in particular, it's kind of like a Catholic satire
Mm.
on Puritanism. Like, the Puritans had ruled in the interregnum, and when Charles II was somehow reinstated, I can't remember how exactly, but the Catholics or came back or whatever, or the Anglicans, and so they could make fun of the Puritans again. And
Hmm.
so I think it's kind of cool that there's a Catholic allusion to a poem that is kind of a Catholic satire on Puritanism.
Yes.
Because Blood Meridian, like
Absolutely. We
you
know where
can,
we're going with this. It's
yeah, yeah,
definitely got a feeling of a satire in certain ways. And I think, I've tried to take notes of examples where I thought it was definitely a satire. But yeah, the Hudibras was a very popular poem for decades. And if you look at it, you're going to want to read it out loud. It's almost like a rap song. It's really, really fast-paced poetry. It's
yeah.
actually kind of fun. It would be fun to have a reading group and just read it all night or something. Anyway, thank you for clearing that up. But God damn it, there was two writers that were Samuel, and how
Butler.
dare them? How dare them? Um, but that brings us to I like it because of it also alludes back to the Fairy Queen with my feelings of literary alchemy from the Renaissance of Shakespeare, etc., which, we keep talking about a little bit. So,
Yeah, and in the Fairy Queen again, like I'm really familiar with book one of the Fairy Queen, and then shamefully unfamiliar with all of the rest. Like I think I've read book two and three, and don't but only once, where I've read book one a lot of time. But anyways, book two like is where Hudibras comes in, and he is a again minor colleague of one of the antagonists in the Fairy Queen, and he's like represents lack of temperance in a military
mm,
context. So like
see,
we
very
can be
interesting.
incontinent in all sorts of ways, but one of the ways we can be incontinent is in anger, right? Or in rage or in fighting and blah blah blah. So it's also kind of funny that maybe there is a kind of satire
Yeah, yeah, and
on
there's an element of war, like you said too. So it is relevant, and we'll take some time and maybe we'll read it. And we can talk about it on a separate
Yeah, yeah,
episode
no,
too.
I would love,
Yeah,
I definitely want to read this poem.
I'd like to really, I've tackled the Fairy Queen a number of times. It does have numerical composition. It does have calendrical and elements to it and alchemy to it. But it's hard to get into and just do it. I mean, you almost do have to take a class or have a reading group or something to keep you motivated, and to help you figure it out. Well, let's go for this chapter 9,
Okay.
right?
Well, we almost, because we haven't been able to do this in such a long time, we might have forgotten sort of the excitement of the end of the last chapter, right? Because
Cliffhanger.
it is a cliffhanger, and like this chapter opens like just and immediately as a continuation of what just happened at the end of the last chapter, which is the ambush.
The ambush.
Um,
And it's a beautiful description. They stop in their tracks, the gang, and they can tell something's up right away, you know.
yeah, in extreme contrast to Captain White and Captain White's company, right? Like
Right.
they were the ones who were ambushed. But
Hmm.
here, it seems like in some ways, the Glanton gang sort of manages to outsmart, their opponents because they notice something and then they like all fall down, right? And they're
That's
flat on
correct.
their face. And also, you see Glanton's competence. Like he
Yes.
says they'll swing to their right, and as he said that, they did so. Like so he kind of knows what he's doing as well, which is
Yeah.
also in stark distinction from Captain White.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point. Very good point. Um, yeah, and so, I was taken, I'll just kind of blurt out what I was thinking about was, you know, a, it's called Apaches in the novel. That is actually not an appropriate term. That would be an enemy slur, and I think it might mean ruthless enemy or something. So,
I think it means enemy.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it means enemy, and so it's really not a good stereotype, and it does last around. It makes us wonder again, is McCarthy being authentic? Is he keeping us in the mood? Is he playing with our stereotypes? Which I think all are valid approaches to look at it. But I did want to say that it's not an appropriate term, and I'm trying to avoid it. Um, I calling them their warriors, but yeah, it is in the novel. It's there, and it's an exciting scene. Because they go right into conflict, and like you said, they almost ambush these warriors,
Yeah.
and it's quite beautiful. I love the part where the kid is described in a flow state. It's like he's done it his whole life. It's like he got his 10,000 hours like Malcolm Gladwell or something,
Right.
he's reached his the zone, if you
Yeah. And later in the novel, he'll be confirmed as a quote unquote Deadeye, right? So
will. Mhm.
it's, in his first battle, again, like harkening back to Captain White, he may have just sort of like buried himself under a corpse or pretended to be a corpse. He wasn't probably fighting or anything like that, but so there may have been a question, well, was he just like so scared that he like, hid rather than fought? Here, like, you know that he can fight and that he will and does.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
he does have the killer instinct as a 16-year-old.
Yeah. And it's Toadvine who hits the warrior. And we see the judge
Right,
in
yeah.
action. We see the judge in action. He does something very interesting. He goes to this dead man and he takes off his war bag and his medicine bag,
Yeah.
and you almost want to be a fly on the wall. Like it's really wrong to do that again. And it's interesting that, there's a judge doing it. Um,
Yeah, it's sort of, what that scene reminded me of was, like and this is also the chapter where he'll give his geology lecture to the company. But, so this is a chapter sort of that, showcases a little bit of the judge as a scientist. On the one hand, he puts on his geology hat and gives a
mhm,
lecture. But
mhm.
here he's almost sort of like an imperialist anthropologist, right? He's
Yes,
like, I find this fascinating.
yes.
There's no monetary value to the calculus or madstone that he appropriates, like but he does have this like, I must know stuff, and there's something
True.
beyond you.
True. I also took it as that idea of Hitler taking or oracle or esoteric objects or occult
Right.
objects and
Yes.
owning
Right.
it so that someone else can't use the power, whether
Right.
or not he could
Oh,
harness it.
yes.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
Also,
that's really cool.
why do they refer to them on page 115 as anti-warriors?
So, that reminded me, I think
Hmm.
that this is a kind of like a reworking of a passage from Suttree.
Ah.
Like so like the whole scene is that um they're on this plain, right? Or this gypsum lake or something like that. And it's just that, they're the way the sky and the sunlight is it so they see the kind of like anti-selves are projected upwards. So like
Right.
when Satri walks in or is walking toward a glass building and he sees himself coming toward himself, he talks about anti-Satri or whatever.
That's
So
right.
like here, like it's like warrior and anti-warrior
Yeah, that's
sort
pretty
of thing.
cool. Very well said, which is also part of what I felt in this chapter, which I'm having a hard time articulating. So I'll just quickly put it out. It seems to me, and as we talk, maybe I'll be able to give examples, that something happens where one thing happens and then it happens again in a different amplified manner. And even these anti-warriors, at the very end of the chapter, we have that ambush and the confrontation.
That is amazing insight. Thank you. Yeah. That's
Okay. Oh, thanks. Because at the end it says, quote, pursuing as all travelers must inversions without end
yeah.
upon other men's
Yeah.
journeys.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And then yes, so we're gonna have the calcification. We're gonna have the taking those medicine bags off, and then Glanton takes off bags, and then they also deal with granny rats, and it's three different amplifications of that first um ransacking, if you will.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and then I just noticed a couple other things.
Well, and like just to kind of play on this repetition sort of theme, in when they see like the Apache quote unquote coming, we get this like polysyndeton again, right? Like
Mhm.
they crossed before the sun and vanished one by one and reappeared again, and they were black in the sun, and they rode out of that vanished sea like burnt phantoms with the legs of the animals kicking up spume that was not real, and they were lost in the sun and lost in the lake, and so we get this like building up again, like this figure of amplification, which we first, I think, really encountered in the Captain White
Mhm.
when the Comanche ambushed Captain White's company. So like
Mhm.
that polysyndeton and like sublime scenes of life or death battle is
Mhm.
seems to be
Mhm.
something that he's doing like throughout.
Yes.
The
Yes.
polysyndeton figure is really cool.
Yeah, that is. It really is like a building up. So
Yeah, so like do you know what like the things that the judge appropriates, like this calculus or madstone, like
yeah, it's from the stomach of an animal.
okay.
Well, the calculus is. That's like a calcified, like a kidney stone or a gallstone.
Right.
Would
Oh,
have been
okay. Yeah.
taken out of an animal, likely.
Yeah.
Suppose it could come from a human, but usually it would be from an animal.
Unused magically probably, right? Like
Yes,
it had
yes,
some
yes,
the it actually had some function.
it did. And as for a medicine bag, that would be so intensely private that I couldn't claim to know. I suppose we could probably find some I found some drawings of medicine bags, but they're usually so personal, I don't think they would be shared. It might be inappropriate to put them on the internet. I don't know. Or even a museum. I didn't look into that. Um, they
Well,
are
I mean,
considered very personal. So he's an anthropologist, and it does mirror like the Rockefeller Feller Institute taking totem poles and African
that's right. Yeah.
things, appropriating these objects as if
Yeah.
you could know what they were, separated from their environment, and their ritual and their history.
Well, that I'm glad you said it that way too, because again, for me, allegory as a kind of the way that it works is through a process of violent abstraction.
Hmm.
So, like, it tears things out of their original context. It changes, the meaning of a word. It uses a word that means one thing in another way. And so that violence of allegory is also related to the imperialistic
Hmm.
material violence of, settler colonial machine, the
Wow.
social machine.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, the second bag that the judge finds to this on this corpse or whatever is like tied alongside the genitals. So that
Yeah.
that really does suggest like this is super
Mhm.
private, like
Yes,
if it's
absolutely.
there, like
And interesting, he knew where to go look for it.
yeah,
Yeah, so he'd
yeah,
already done this before. Done some,
yeah,
he had experience at this.
yes.
Yeah, I find that just such a violation, Whew, yeah,
Yeah, knowledge is can, help people violate.
absolutely.
And the judge and knowledge, I think, like the judge is related to knowledge over and over again, like obviously in the geology lecture.
Yeah, one thing I also noticed, and I had put it in my notes, was kind of cool, was at the beginning when they have this ambush, the kid and Toadvine are talking. So we get these two little glimpses into Toadvine, and we know Toadvine killed the warrior, but
Yeah,
he goes, "Oh, it sounds like packs of hounds, Toadvine." And the kid goes, "It sounds like geese to me." And then later we find out that the narrator describes it as wild ducks, which is
right.
kind
Yeah.
of like supports the kid's perspective in a way, right? I kind of thought that was really interesting. There was a textual, just no, the kid's right.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
kid's right on this
yeah.
one.
Lurid avatar. We didn't use the word avatar in 1985 like it's so common now. That it was so crazy to have that term in there, lurid avatar in the
Yeah,
novel. Now it's like, oh, why would he say avatar or something? Like it's just weird. Yeah.
yeah.
It means descent.
Avatar?
Yeah.
It's like the embodiment of a god, isn't it, or something?
Yes.
Like,
Yes. It's a Sanskrit Hindu word. And
yeah.
there's a few Asian and exotic, if you will, dervish, jinn, um,
Yeah, yeah,
Semitic words. There's a combination of different words in this chapter. Maybe there are on the other chapters too, but it just seemed to stand out to me. And Jin and Dervish were both on page 117, which we read an excerpt. Our opening statement was from page 117, and I think 117 always gives you something in core memory.
wherever, whatever
Whatever,
novel, look to
whatever. That's
117.
right. Yeah. Or showing up somewhere.
Yeah, I love that passage that you read, and yeah, that is really interesting. This kind of the Orientalism of Blood Meridian. The
Yeah.
like the way Edward Said would describe
Oh,
Orientalism as a kind of
exactly. I thought of him exactly when I said exotic. That's so funny you thought
like
that too.
fantasy
Yes.
formation of the East.
Right.
There's
Which
yeah,
I'm wondering, is that what this novel is doing in a way, and why it would use some of these contrary terms and descriptions, right? But I do want to read this one sentence because it relates to the avatars being descended or manifested, right? And they can travel through time and space and material, air, water, fire, stone, in uh in Hinduism. And here's a sentence. I just think so beautiful. Like the cries of souls broke through some misweave in the welt of things into the world below.
yeah,
And that's the warriors coming out at them, right? And
yeah.
it's so like
The
Westworld.
anti-warriors.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
anti-wars, because Westworld has this thing where they just manifest. So I just thought that was really beautiful.
yeah.
And we're only like a page into this chapter.
Well, yeah, the passage that you read and you mentioned like the jinn and dervishes,
Mm,
so there's this kind of like Islamism or something in
mm,
like a little, well, in, I mean, those terms could be related to Islamic culture, Middle Eastern, sort of cultural stuff, like immediately. You also sort of sent me some notes on Ignis Fatuus, and in there you mentioned, or you said, or there you quoted somebody who was saying like in a certain Middle Eastern context, it's called Abu Fanus or something like that, and
mm.
I was looking that up, and that's also a jinn, right? And jinns are sort of like the element they live in is fire, and and the word has appeared. This is the second time the word appears in the novel. The first time was when the tarot reading scene and the judge stepping through the fire like some great jinn or something like
Yes,
that,
exactly.
right? So McCarthy was aware that jinn is related to fire,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
dervishes are obviously dancers, and probably I kind of associate them with Sufism or something
Yes,
like
yes. I
mystical
think they
Islam.
are generally associated with Sufism. And
Uh,
also,
the,
you
but
have
the I mean,
Halartarti.
pardon me.
We have the word fire worshiping in this chapter, which is interesting too, going back to the
Right,
beginning,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that word. Yeah,
Yeah, I can't say it.
pyrolatrous.
Thank you.
Like idolatrous, but
Yes, Pyra. Yeah, thank you.
pyrolatrous. I don't
Yes.
know. That
Oh,
sounds
that was good. That was good. That was good.
but like also, there's the kind of like Middle Eastern fire imagery sort of thing is also in Moby Dick.
Yes, it
So
is.
it could be that, like Ahab has this counselor Fadala or something,
Mm-hmm.
and Ahab is kind of like, or maybe via Fadala, like a kind of fire worshipping
Mm.
kind of guy or something like that. So fire here is kind of also tied up in this.
Good insight. And I was thinking desert cultures too, with the some of the words, the cultures where those words come from are desert sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's that reference to the book of Job, right? Out of that whirlwind, no voice spoke, which is a kind of like reversal of a passage in the book of Job.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Very cool.
And there's the kind of the legal theme, the sort of legal motifs that McCarthy is exploring, and that are often tied to the figure of the judge, obviously being a judge.
Hmm.
We have that in the chapter subheadings. One of the subheadings is a probate.
Oh yeah, that's
So
right.
that refers to that, dispensing of Granny Rat's goods or whatever after the
Hmm.
Delaware thing
Hmm.
was
Oh yeah,
lost.
I did want to talk about that too. So there's
Yeah,
two things I just thought of right now. You reminded me of. One, we have the dead warrior, and they write that there's lice on his head. And then
right.
a little bit later on, it says the sand moves like an army of lice.
Yes.
And one thing about this international kind of global reference of language is that lice are really cool because they found out from the DNA of lice that the lice that would have been on Colombians and South Americans and early indigenous peoples in America would have come from Mongolia. And so it confirms what there's already theories that people came over from
Right.
Mongolia, but it's actually been confirmed. So I thought that was really kind of cool, and I wonder, intuitively McCarthy had that in there, because we don't always know how you're writing all this stuff and where your imagination is taking us.
That's right.
You're
Yeah.
going to tell us about it a bit later on with my confession. It ties into that, but it's really, really kind of amazing that they could find this trace of world traveling and culture traveling around that connects that. I also thought that in the Whitcliffe collection is before he wrote Blood Meridian, he wrote something called The Campaign, and it was set in Mongolia, and he abandoned that, which I thought was a good idea to write the Western in his own country
Right.
personally.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting that this lice thing and the Mongolian connection to indigenous peoples in various parts of North and South America is pretty cool. The other thing with lice is that we know that we had body lice. We know we had clothing since 190,000 years ago, at least, because body lice is a different animal than the head lice, and it lives in the fabric, whereas obviously the other lice lives on your body. And
Yeah.
so they have traced that DNA back 190,000 years. I just thought that was really cool. You go down these rabbit holes with
That is
McCarthy,
so
right?
cool. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah.
Like that, I loved when you told me that about the lice, because like at when I was doing like my reading, I was like focusing on the way the men in the company related to their horses in this
Mm.
chapter, and the
Hmm.
kind of figure of the horse. And so in a way, like what when I read that you were thinking about the lice and the two mentions of it in one chapter, like, and that
Yes.
does seem kind
That's
of
what I'm
like,
saying. It's weird.
a mark of intention, like
Yes.
whatever it means, it's a
Hmm.
obscure intention, but it does seem kind of like
Hmm.
intentional. But the idea of the kind of human animal assemblage, so like people and horses have lived together and worked together and related in different ways, like forever all around the world, and so the human lice assemblage and then the human horse assemblage
Very
in
good.
in this chapter is kind of cool to think about.
Well, I remember Stephen Jay Gould said that dogs, horses, and humans have this common relationship, and they're all at the very end of their tree of of survival of the evolution tree. They're not like the strongest; they are at the very clinging on to existence, right? So they have that in common. That's cool. Well, now
Really
with
cool.
you mentioned Granny Rat, so the judge poaches the warriors personal items, right? He goes through his kit. Well, Glanton goes through Granny Rat's. Granny Rat is missing. He's gone AWOL. And I mean, it's almost comedic. But then you find out that, yeah, the Delawares come back and they've probably killed him. It's
Yeah.
kind of horrible. And you're like, why can't he abandon? Why can't he go AWOL? And then Glanton takes his stuff and he doesn't even save it. He burns it all. Now, why wouldn't that be useful? It occurred to me maybe it's not cursed, but it's coward's clothing. It's coward's possessions. Maybe no, it's not good enough for me to even touch his stuff. I really don't understand that
Or
process.
it's a, yeah, like a final insult, like, you
Yeah.
know.
And maybe nobody wants it because, he insulted them. Like if your friend abandons you or your comrade or your company of brothers, see, they are treating it perhaps like a military, more military than it might appear at first. There is punishment for leaving that job.
I guess that's why they call it a probate, right? Like a
Yeah.
probate is, a process by which a will is read and legitimized or something like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, that, like again, a kind of like a satirical use of a probate. This is not really a probate scene. They've
Right.
killed this guy and they've taken his belongings and,
Yeah,
well, one gun gets used, right?
that's
Somehow,
true.
why? So, Granny Rat willed his rifle to David Brown or
Yeah, that's
something, and
right.
then
That's right.
but all the rest of the stuff was just destroyed. So like the idea of a will is here, and
Mhm.
it was Rat's. It was an act of will to like betray the company and take off with the horse and the gun and everything that they outfitted him with.
Why do you think he did that? Did he get afraid?
Yeah, I feel like he probably did that because it was a convenient way for him to get out of prison. Otherwise, how
That's
was
great. That's a great insight. Yeah. Yeah, that is a good insight. It probably was that. And we're thinking he's part of a team, but he was just like, "Oh, I got an idea how to get out of
yeah,
here." Okay.
yeah, yeah. I
And
don't
then so that amplifies the possessions or someone's gone through a dead body's possessions. Then there's the haunted
know.
coach where
Yes.
Glanton climbs up and he doesn't even care about most of the stuff. He goes through it. Maybe he does keep one or two things, but it's actually shocking that he doesn't even remove the horses from the carriage. He just lets them run. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a death sentence for those horses,
Yeah.
which I suppose they were already in that way. Maybe he couldn't handle killing them himself. I don't know. But it's weird that there's three different things where all in one chapter it seems again condensed and amplified.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I don't know what it means, and I think there's something else that happens too that really kind of what's going on here. This
What's
chapter is
that?
very, very interestingly constructed.
Yeah. For me, like this was, like when they camp and the judge gives a geology lecture. I
Hmm.
don't know if we're ready to go that far ahead.
Oh, why not? We can
Mm.
backtrack.
But this is one of the moments that definitely comes out of Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession.
Mm-hmm.
But so I reread, the Chamberlain material and like
Oh,
just to
cool.
compare it, and it's incredibly different in Chamberlain. You know, like all the characters are quite different. The judge has become something very different in Blood Meridian. Even Glanton has become something quite different in
Hmm.
Chamberlain. Like in the basically in the scene where they enter New Mexico and they're searching for El Dorado,
Wow.
which interesting, like which Chamberlain also calls or quotes the mystic city of um, uh, Cibola.
Mm-hmm. Chibula, yeah.
Like so in Chamberlain, Glanton is like he could kill, he could like collect scalps or whatever, but he's not, but he also could like, prospect for gold, right? So in Chamberlain, Glanton really does kind of seem in some ways more interested in money than
Yeah.
Matthews Glanton, who just seems to be interested in war, right? And money
Yes.
just like comes and goes and he just spends it like crazy and doesn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so like McCarthy has changed even Glanton, and like in the scene where the judge is giving a lecture on geology, um, Glanton tries to intervene and says, that goes against, oh yeah, so I can read the
Yeah,
passage
please.
from Chamberlain, you know, so here it is. Quote, though there was no grass, Glanton decided to remain here all night. We had brought along a small supply of mesquite beans, of which our poor animals made an apology of a supper. Judge Holden mounted a rock for a rostrum and gave us a scientific lecture on geology. The scalp hunters, quote unquote, grouped in easy attitude around, listened to the demon like literati with marked attention. His lecture, no doubt, was very learned, but hardly true, for one statement he made was, quote, that millions of years had witnessed the operation producing the result around us, unquote, which Glanton, with recollections of the Bible teaching his young mind had undergone, said was a damned lie. So like Glanton is the one who kind of voices opposition in Chamberlain, but
Mhm.
in McCarthy, we do get a kind of voiced opposition, I think, like something about uh let's see, in McCarthy we read a few would quote him scripture to confound his ordering up of eons out of the ancient chaos and other apostate supposings. So, like, but
Mhm.
it's not Glanton, right? Glanton in McCarthy McCarthy has separated Glanton from any Christianity, I think,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
interesting.
That is fascinating. And I mean, we say it makes me think about what do we think about literature? Why do we read it? What does it mean to us? Is auteur theory dead? It's been dead for a while with movies. There's really only maybe Hitchcock, Cronenberg, Lynch. It's not like, there's all those there's not filmmakers like doing those kind of repeated themes in their movies as much. And in fact, there's
Right.
essays out there, there's articles about that movies are literal now. I remember when a TV show came out a few years ago, there's big billboards of it, and it was like Hansel and Gretel. I went, Stag, they're not even trying to make a metaphor or make us figure out that it's based on Hansel and Gretel. It's just called that now. It was an action TV show or something. I didn't watch it, but that are there movies with that subconscious kind of meaning that you can read into things, with the films of like the 70s and 80s where you could analyze Marxism or socialism or capitalism. Now it's like
That,
literally
yeah, or that just by virtue of its mysteriousness would make you want to watch it again and again.
again.
Like,
Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because there's something it's withholding, right? Like, or
Yes. Yes.
and drawing you out to
Yeah.
do it again.
Exactly. I mean, I watched Rear Window this week. I can't even, it's beyond ridiculous how many times. It doesn't even matter how many times I watch it. It doesn't mean
Yeah,
anything because I've just watched it too many times.
yeah.
And I couldn't stop, and I absolutely felt thrilled by it again. And at a conference I was at with online for the
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I was in a conference too. I did a paper on magic and social realism, social justice. Sorry, magic, social real, social justice. Similar maybe. Um,
Maybe.
but somebody gave a paper on Marnie, and it was like history and films, and it was so incredible that it gave me that thrill of analysis of critiquing a movie. But do kids go to school and say, yeah, I mean, this novel makes me to another planet or something, I don't know. Um,
They get AI to read the novel and then AI to write their paper. Just kidding,
yeah,
kids.
but it is
I know you
interesting.
don't do that.
No, kids don't do that. It was interesting your reading of the phrase in My Confession, which was still really nicely done because it was an archaic style of writing. But to see, you really do see the imagination that McCarthy brought to it, and
Yeah.
go further with fiction.
Yeah.
You can say more with fiction than you can with literal. So I mean,
We get this passage in McCarthy, like I'd read this already. A few would quote him scripture to confound his ordering up of eons out of the ancient chaos and other apostate supposings. The judge smiled. Books lie, he said. So he's referring to the Bible.
absolutely.
God don't lie, says somebody, but we don't know who. No, said the judge, he does not. And these are his words. He held up a chunk of rock. He speaks in stones and trees, the bones of things, right? That's what the judge says.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
not in Chamberlain, so that's like a pure fabrication.
And it's
Uh,
quite incredible.
and why would he include trees? He's talking about stones, right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm, mhm,
I don't know where the trees are coming from, but it is the case in Finnegan's Wake that Shem and Sean, right, the kind of two primal
mhm,
like sons of the earwicker family or
mhm,
whatever, that they're, you know, Sean is a stone and Shem is a tree, right? So the famous Anna Livia Pluribel chapter where
mhm.
they
Very.
turn into a stone and a tree.
Mhm.
So, like why does McCarthy like fabricate this other thing that isn't in Chamberlain, right? So it's clear McCarthy does not care to be, you know, faithful to the Chamberlain text, or he's not writing like a historical account of something, that he's taking history as material for an artistic creation,
Yeah,
and it's
he's not historically correct.
no, not at all, and he doesn't care to
He
be,
doesn't
right?
care to be. Yeah.
Like, so that's also kind of amazing. Then you're reading something that you're not reading something that's historically accurate. Like, it has historically accurate information in it all over the place, but it's being deployed for artistic purposes to create this, work of art.
Yeah.
And that's really cool that he's not faithful to Chamberlain's text, but
Right.
he also like um, you know, he's obviously deeply respectful of it, but he's not just trying to duplicate it.
Well, it's also interesting because this kind of philosophical adage that he says that they speak in trees and stone, Buddhists don't believe in God, and we could agree to that. It is a very universal description of a force, you know. We
Yes.
probably agree to that. Plus, we've got what is man? Any references to clay are connected to stone. Clay is just tiny ground up stones, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, stone in a different material or a different liquefaction. I don't know what
It's
it's
very, it's
called.
very like, also it's like you said, Buddhist, it's also very sort of Spinozist, right? Like
Yes.
Spinoza basically just equated God with nature.
Yeah.
So like here, this is a very naturalized, or like this is a very Spinozan God that the
Yeah.
judge is talking about.
And so did Jakob Boehm. He felt that that was how you had a mystical experience, was through a natural environment. He felt it was really something to look into and be open to.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, very, very cool.
So yeah, it was neat to go back to Chamberlain and kind of talk about that,
Yes.
and like reread Chamberlain and just kind of realize how the way that McCarthy was using Chamberlain, like taking pieces and like taking things out, changing things to suit his own aesthetic needs, right? Like the need
Incredible.
of the novel. So that's really cool to read.
Very cool. Not unlike a cut up or a collage or harnessing
Exactly. Yeah.
and finding it where he walked around the countryside obviously and got inspiration for descriptions. He took things literally out of other novels, anthropomorphic descriptions out of other people's works and applied it himself. Yeah, pretty cool. So they get, there's a word Gastine, and I had to look it up.
Okay.
There's always, and it's waste. It's a wasteland. So you've got pale wasteland again in this chapter. So I thought of you, of course, when I was looking it up. I went, oh, wow,
Here's the
it's such
wasteland.
it's such an unusual word too. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of this encounter in Santa Rita del Cobre with the squatters? So they're like again, they're prospectors looking for gold, and they were attacked, and they're kind of huddled in this place, and in this horribly abject situation where they have no food. They have like a do they have a dead mule that they're
They
kind of
have a
eating
dead mule
from?
that they're eating from back to front. Yes.
And there's a
And then,
snake bit horse
yes,
who,
that they're
who
keeping alive in case,
yeah.
probably in case they have to eat it. And then one of the guys says, with a snake bite? Like, are
Yeah,
you afraid of that poison coming? Because I think it would last. I don't think it fades away. I don't think you would want to eat a part
snake
of
bit
a snake bit
animal.
flesh. No, because it doesn't go away. It's not like that. I don't think it doesn't putrefy, you know, um, in the same way that rot would. I think it's an incredible scene, but it's also made me feel kind of horrific because it was like a haunted house story or something where they're trapped in this facility. They've got nowhere to go and they've got no life. One of the guys is shot in the is wounded in the chest, which
Right,
mirrors our
yeah.
dead warrior again,
Yeah.
right? And he's sitting there, he's singing hymns by the time he leaves, which is quite, you could just see that cinematically being beautiful, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's there's a kind of disgust that the Glanton gang feels
Oh,
toward these people,
totally.
and but also these people are like, why do you treat your horses like pets? Which Glanton thinks is like he thinks that these people don't know anything. Like, and
He does. You're right. That's a great part because we really see into him. I want to see if I can find it, but he says something like the folly of fools or something, right?
yeah, yeah.
He's like,
But they do like these two very different types of people or groups like they do meet at that in that kind of in that musical sort of dimension with those hymns, right? Like
yeah.
the hymn somehow connects them, which
And it's
is
true. And it is a,
doesn't Glanton say come out if you're white and Christian?
yes, he does. He does say if you're white. I don't know if he says Christian. Good point. But he
Oh no,
does.
the soldier who's when the kid falls asleep in the tree in chapter 2,
Oh,
the
yeah,
soldier says
that's
I'm
right.
white and Christian.
Yeah. But this guy, I think he goes, yeah, oh, open the door if you're white or something.
Yeah,
He does say something like that. And yeah, they are kind of disgusted by them because it's almost like they're delirious. Whether or not they are, but they're really at the end of the rope, like they have nowhere else to go, I suppose. And it really is a real place. That place is still there. There's pictures of it, or at least diagrams are left from it,
yeah.
which I looked into and I'll put on social media. They're pretty cool that it really is a real place, a copper mine.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think there was a significant conflict between the quote unquote Apache
yes, yes.
and the Hispanic New Mexicans there, or something like that, I
Yeah.
think.
And they want to go with them, but they spend at least a day there, a day and a night or something, maybe 2 days because they start sleeping outside and it's a beautiful description of the stars and then they have to move inside for the rain. So they're spending some time there. They share a little bit of food with these guys. I think they give them a something to kind of keep them going for who knows how long, but they do not want to travel with them. They want to get away from them.
Yeah, no.
And I think there might be drinking involved. And so something very strange happens is that there's four guys, and one of them might be a child, or is there four guys and a child? It's hard to tell. I think there's four of them. One is wounded, three are mobile, and they sneak out at night to get food because they're afraid of being attacked or to get water or something, right? Maybe plant life to bring back. And then there's a child. The next thing we know, when they wake up one morning, the kid's dead. And
Right.
we don't know anything about what happened.
Yeah.
Of course, having read the novel before, when you think about it now, we know the judge differently. And just the scene to read it, which I read it the first time of him cleaning his teeth, didn't mean anything to me. With a thorn, now it seems extremely aggressive.
Yeah.
I found it threatening. Like, did
Well, it's describing him picking his teeth as if he's just eaten something.
correct. Yeah. Did he take a bite out of the kid? Did he kill the kid? I mean, it's definitely,
You
but
know,
you get,
I
go ahead.
was in reading this, I'm like I was remembering somewhere McCarthy, has an encounter between Toadvine and the judge after the judge kills the boy.
Yes.
Toadvine says, "God damn you, Holden." And I thought it was this one, but it was actually one coming up. So the judge has, and this boy, by the way, is described in the offensive term of quote unquote half breed.
Yes.
One thing in an early draft of Blood Meridian, the kid was kind of mixed or heritage, right? He was
Correct.
described as both having Spanish and Saxon
Right.
and Celtic, so he had I think he was described as having a Spanish grandmother or something like that.
Mhm, mhm.
So the death of this boy is, in some ways, maybe there are like three. I'm kind of interested now, like with the Four of Cups sort of theme, because like the kid maybe gets killed at the end of the novel, this by the judge. This is the first kind of boy that the judge has preyed on,
Mhm,
right? And
mhm.
then there's at least one more,
Yes,
which leads to the encounter between Toadvine and the judge. And I
yes.
don't know if there's another one so that the kid's final encounter is like the fourth or something. But in Chamberlain, by the way,
Mhm.
Chamberlain describes the judge as having killed a young person in an encampment, but it was a woman,
Oh.
you know. And so McCarthy is kind of also, this is another way McCarthy has changed some things.
Mm,
When we have these one-on-one kind of murders that we sort of assume the judge has committed, or that he actually has committed,
mm,
it is sort of like different from Chamberlain, right? So in Chamberlain, it seems like gender-based, maybe sexual violence was
mm,
involved as
mm.
well, but here it's, like, so the judge has a thing for killing boys, and so even the kid kind of counts
Well,
in terms.
yeah, I mean, certainly, I think what he does is he brings, a kind of he underlines homoeroticism. I mean, it's there in the novel to some degree. With the crotch, cutting out that knowing to go to the crotch, and we're going to have some other things come through this novel that, there's gender violence for sure, and that he does seem to be a pedophile, the judge. It's, and you're right. By the time the next kid dies and you read the novel again, then you realize, oh, the judge probably killed this kid. They just leave it a mystery that the kid died through the night.
Yeah,
Who could it have been? You
yeah,
know? And
yeah,
then you think, oh, I mean, it's got to have a rape involved or something. And you made a great point when we were talking our production thing, when I was talking about that I found it kind of bizarre at the end of this segment where they carry the boy out and he's almost beheaded because his neck is broken. And so it's
yes,
that alludes to beheadedness. And then the donkey had top half of its body and its legs are gone because they ate it. And they're thrown into the same mud pile. So you've got clay, mud, stone, being this source of life of humans. And which reminds
and
me,
and also their disappearance, without
right,
a cry.
right. Which you reminded, you said jinns come out of the fire, and the thing with the jinn is that humans come out of stone. In that mythology of the jinn thing. So you just reminded me of that too. But here I was thinking this is a half donkey, half man, like a really lame centaur, and you made the point that it possibly because the kid rode a mule, this could be
Right.
foreshadowing.
Yes.
It's most
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
some kind of foreshadowing.
And
About
and repetition, like
yes,
just retelling and retelling and
yes,
layers and
yeah,
layers
yeah,
of variations.
yes. I wanted to say about Glanton, kind of looking at like that these guys that they wouldn't have a horse as a pet. It's funny, I have a few friends that had horses when we were growing up, and now they would not own a horse and they wouldn't ride one. They've had a sense of guilt or like, thank you for letting me ride you, and I'm sorry I did that kind of a thing. Now they're like, no, horses shouldn't be red. Kind of funny,
Huh.
you know.
I think like in here, like the yeah, that the way that when the rain starts, right?
Mm,
The horses have to stay outside,
yeah,
but the men would, go out into the rain and check on the horses, and the horses would dap their feet. And I love
I
that
do
verb,
too.
dap. Oh,
Yeah.
so you can hear it, and
And
sound that it's describing. But like, so they have this kind of democratic relationship with their horses. So it is kind of like an assemblage, right? This
yeah.
is like a war assemblage, this man horse assemblage.
Hmm.
And so the squatters think that this is like, oh, you're checking on your pet, you're like, it's your set, you have that sentimental relationship with your pet. But this isn't like that, right? It is kind of like these people are like college, or like this man and this horse are colleagues and
They are
peers.
colleagues. Yeah,
You know?
that's a good point. That's good. They're sentient beings, and it's the same as dogs in Vietnam. The dog they had dogs in Vietnam, and the soldiers. And when the war ended, they didn't bring the dogs back, and that was an added trauma to veterans because these
Oh,
dogs were co-soldiers to them, so they feel
right,
like
yeah,
they
of
left their
course.
soldiers behind. Yeah. And definitely, these are relationships. You're right about that. And in fact, I did find it endearing that there's a couple times in the novel when Glanton talks to his horses. And as much of a monster he is, there is that endearing thing about him with his horses. He's got a relationship with them for sure.
And the horses have relationships with each other, right?
Yes.
So you get that really interesting moment where I think it's one of the Delaware's horses bites at or bites the snake bit horse.
Yes.
It's like you're
You're
wrong.
you're sick.
You're
Get
not.
away from me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
So you have all these, like, there is like this kind of really interesting kind of non-human perspective that the novel takes on different relationships among different living beings, which is really cool.
Well, my favorite novels have always been interspecies. And you know what I did? I thought, well, you know what? I really love Wizard of Oz. So today I thought I'm gonna watch Wicked. I don't want to watch Wicked. I just feel like it's not my movie, but I'm obsessed with Wizard of Oz imagery. There's very little of it in there. There's some. I'm being too hard. But the first few minutes of the movie, I'm like, yeah, this is a mistake. I'm not into this. But I have to look at it because it's Wizard of Oz. You know what I mean? And the next thing you know, there's bears and they're talking and they're friends with them. And I was like, okay, now we got a movie. Like the bears were midwives in it. So now I was like, no, I like this movie now. As long as we keep getting the animals coming in, talking, not talking, they were wearing clothes. It was like Narnia. It was super cute. But yeah, overall, the I will give my I'm not a Wicked fan, but when she gets her broom and flies around the sky, I almost cried. So, the movie not my kind of movie overall. But boy, it was worth it for that minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The talking bears.
The talking bears and her
And
getting her broom.
right,
She becomes a flying witch. Then I was
right.
like, it was elation. Yeah, I didn't like the music.
Hmm.
Yeah. And yet I like the music in the original. Isn't that funny?
In
Um,
the actual musical?
yeah, yeah. In the original one, yes. In the original movie with
Oh,
Judy.
in the original
Oh
movie,
yeah,
okay.
I didn't see the musical on stage either. No, you couldn't drag me to one.
Why not?
I don't like
You don't like musicals?
musicals. No.
Oh,
No.
really?
No. I don't know why. I just don't like them. I feel uncomfortable.
Is it because you're a painter and like it's your
But then
art is
I like Grease. I like Jesus Christ Superstar. I just
Oh, okay.
not want to go in the theater and see a musical. No.
So film musicals are okay.
Maybe, yeah, but I didn't watch Cats or any of those Andrew Lloyd Webber ones. I just not my cup of tea. I feel awkward even thinking about them.
Well, Cats is based on a T.S. Eliot poem.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. That part's cool. And I like cats, but I just wouldn't go to the play or the musical, whatever. It's just one of those, most things I'm pretty open-minded to, just not that. Like Les Mis is Trey Mis for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read the book.
That's a commitment.
It
That's a
is a
pretty long
commitment.
book.
Yes. Well, it's like the Fairy Queen and Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
Blood Meridian.
and
If you
Blood Meridian, absolutely. I think we lost a couple. My friend Sarah in Edmonton, I'm not sure if she's listening still or if she's reading the book, but we sold a few copies of Blood Meridian in Edmonton.
that is
And
excellent.
I know they read them because her friend read it and he wrote like a review, like a satire review of the language.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. He's a Faulkner fan, so I think he's going to stay a Faulkner fan.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
some Faulkner scholars converted to McCarthy.
that's
And
correct. That is correct. Let's see.
well, this is an unevenly divided chapter, but we do have two sections to it. So
Mhm.
like there's a whole bunch of different things happen in the chapter. Like we probably missed a lot, but whatever. But the last section is just sort of this encounter, right? Like, well, this is where Ignis Fatuus
Correct.
They leave I don't know, they leave the squatters behind,
Hmm.
and they take off. And they, at dusk they halted and built a fire, and then, they moved on, but they left their fire, and they see the fire changing locations, and then they encounter this group of buffalo hunters. Um,
Yeah.
the ciboleros,
Yeah. Yes.
and they have this kind of this anti-warrior or inversions without end thing, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
what do you what it's an interesting sort of encounter, uh, like they both approach each other warily, so they're
Hmm.
both kind of seasoned
Hmm.
horse
Soldiers,
people.
travelers.
One group, yeah, like one group are hunters and the other is are soldiers. So I
Yes.
don't know, like hunting and war kind of meet each other, and they don't really have much to do with each other, but they leave each other alone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like the Glanton gang leave these horsemen alone. And so there's a kind of respect there or something, and there's that passage where, these are buffalo hunters. They have like dried meat or something with them, and the Americans or the Glanton's company basically, may have wanted some, but the disposition to exchange was foreign to them, which
Yeah.
I thought was interesting.
That is interesting.
Right. You were
Well, I
talking
would
about,
think that maybe it just meant they would normally steal from somebody. They would just take
right? They
it
were just
away.
taped, yeah.
They would just take. And it is strange that there does seem to be, I could see this like a John Wick moment or a Tarantino moment where there's that tension. And
Yeah.
they're like, are they going to be, like they're riding by and looking at each other carefully or trying to act cool that they're not threatened? And why they don't confront is maybe it's just too much. Maybe they're just tired. They want to get on the road. Oh, no, but it is weird that there isn't actually a confrontation. And I think, I would say that I'm going to say that there's different kinds of ways of living and hunting. And, when we get to any talk of war with the judge later on, I've got some things I want to say with that that contest his ideas. And I think that almost suggests the kind of who lives outside and who's traveling in these deserts. We do have anti-warriors, we have indigenous people, we have scalp hunters, and then buffalo hunters. And these are all different economies and all different ways to live. I think it just adds maybe a realism. Maybe it gives me hope that there's different ways to look at this novel. It's not
Yeah,
a
yeah, like
humanity.
the Chiboleros, I'm probably mispronouncing that, or
Sounds
but
pretty good to me.
they were like
Bolero.
part of a Hispanic group in New Mexico or something like that, but they were all, they had sort of like their people came about through sort of like um, Spanish explorers, settling with local indigenous people, right? So, their existence is, quote unquote, like the half breed, except, here in Canada, we talk about the Métis, and when I was growing up, Métis sort of meant like half, right? Like
Hmm.
you're half European and half indigenous.
Hmm.
But, but it actually means Métis is a positive concept, right?
Yes,
It is a post-contact people. So the Chiboleros are like a post-contact people.
very good point.
Um, and whereas, Glanton's company does not represent that at all. They represent, the colonial sort of mindset, right?
Hmm.
But it is also interesting, we have on the one hand a group of buffalo hunters, and by the end of the novel, we're going to have this image of these rows of bones, right?
Hmm.
And the extinction of the buffalo. So on the one hand, we have like one group pursuing the extinction of one species, and the Glanton's company is in some way representative of, like settler colonial violence and indigenous genocide, right? So we have this sort of maybe conflation of two different separate things, but related and happening in the same place. And
Well, yeah, that's so cool. And it also is, another foreshadowing. So, the page before that foreshadowed perhaps a kid and his destiny, and now this foreshadowing the buffalo hunters at the end. That's very true. And it works with that inversion idea too. All of which was that I had a kind of a crazy feeling when I read this. I hope I'm not jumping away from your topic here too much. And that there's stages of alchemy.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
had a profound feeling that this chapter had 7 stages of alchemy in it. And so I typed them out and I went through it a couple of times trying to find literary allusions or literal allusions to it. And I found something for each one of those phases. Their calcification, which would have been that calculus
So
in the
is this the process of like transforming lead into gold, whether you take that literally or
yes.
spiritually?
All of these would be literary alchemy does have chemists in it. Shakespeare had the Tempest, and Prospero was an alchemist, and Chaucer had a satire about alchemy. But there's serious ones. They have the sense of that you might have alchemy acted out in them, or you may have a self. Really, alchemy is about self-discovery and self-transformation. So in a way, we have that transformation from the warriors at the beginning to your buffalo hunters at the end. And in amongst all of that, I found examples of 7 stages of the alchemy. And I've got page numbers. I have it ready to post on Substack because I didn't want to go page while we're doing it. I just don't think it translates well into a podcast. It's probably better to have it written down. But the 7 stages are calcification, which would have been the calculus. Dissolution, I have as several things when they're in the rainstorm and the rain comes down through the rafters and there's liquid streams of liquid clay.
Right.
It could be the dry lake. Separation, literally the word is separated is in that chapter, although it's in the novel 8 times anyway. I did double check how many times were mentioned. Like gin is mentioned twice. Alchemy and alchemically are in it twice, but not in this chapter. I just thought that's funny because, I hadn't noticed it before until I went and definitely looked for the word alchemy. Separation, I would say that was Granny Rat going away and the blood in the sand, because those are two different types. Conjunction, the kid being in a flow state, and legless donkey and the dead boy. So they are transforming into something else. I have more notes, as I say, on Substack. Fermentation, obviously, the dead mule, the wound, and the guy dying from it, or putrefaction. Distillation, the dry lake again. And there's maybe even that tornado and water. And then coagulation again, blood in the sand. So some of these go over. There's a healed wound on the torso of the dead warrior,
Right.
and it's a grease torso. I found that very kind of alchemical too, and blood in the sand. So I did put that on our Substack page. It'll be up there tomorrow if anybody wants to follow through. But what happened? I told my husband, I said, I started kind of like with a harebrained idea. By the time I spent a few days on this, I kind of felt creeped out that this really does underscore, well, creeped out in a good way. That feeling when you feel like you're onto something.
That's right.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I've got my murder board going. I'm onto something here. And I do feel like it helps the argument of this being a literary alchemy.
Well, and it's interesting that you started thinking about this in this chapter, chapter 9, because in chapter 10, which is like
Hmm.
kind of a standout chapter from the rest of the novel because it's like a first person narration of something that happened in the kid's past, like
Right.
before the Tobin's story of how the judge and the Glanton gang got together, right?
Hmm. You're
And
right.
then we'll have that story about the judge
Yeah.
mixing the
Yes, the
gunpowder.
gunpowder. Well, yeah, it's like it's preparing us. It's like we had to read, like any initiation. I've always said Blood Meridian is like a reset. It's like a psychedelic drug, and you read it and you get reset into it again. And it takes you on that journey all over again. You think you knew what would happen, and then it contests your beliefs about the judge and the kid all over again. You're like, what does this mean? It's not a static novel in any way. And so it is an alchemical self-discovery journey, and if you approach it that way, it really can be.
Well,
Yes,
you're kind of saying it's like a tool or a piece of technology or
totally.
maybe a weapon
Hmm.
that you can use for things.
Absolutely, which was what literary alchemy would be. The theory behind that would be that those books are taking you on that. They're providing that even if they don't literally talk about alchemy. But some of them do have an alchemist in it. They're like, literal and metaphorical. But this one is, and here it is, chapter 9. And we've had magic in the novel already that we've talked about, of course. But it was just funny to see that there was really processes in here that you could line up, you know you could extend it. And you're right, going into we're just over a third of the book. We've had our initiation. We're getting used to the book now.
Yeah.
We're getting used to the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking about like how history is transformed into art in, in the process of adapting Chamberlain, like,
Yes.
yeah, he changes or transforms history into art. So, which is also, like Joyce's sort of like, or
Mhm.
Stephen Dedalus's thing in Ulysses, where he says, or maybe it's in a portrait where he says, art transforms the, daily bread of existence into something everlasting. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
using that liturgy, the sort of Catholic idea of transubstantiation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Blood Meridian than just the title. The meridian could be all the things that have blood on Earth. We're focused on that in this novel. We're not, that's the meridian there could be that as well as many other interpretations. Yeah. Yeah, that's very good. I'm kind of blown away by your feeling of like the foreshadowing of the donkey and the kid because he starts on that donkey at the beginning of the novel. It kind of really tripped me out the other day.
It's just working through figures that are repeating and they're just being changed with every
Yes.
repetition. So it's like
Yes.
variations on variations.
Yes.
And on the one hand, you wonder if it's like, if there is a static meaning behind all the variations, or that there's something he's getting to,
Hmm.
or if the variations are just like that's the end purpose, right? Just to so there is no further meaning, but just to wonderfully elaborate all these variations, but on all these like problems and
Hmm.
complexes, like
Hmm.
history, philosophy, theology,
Hmm.
technology, like science, art, it's all sort of in the mix and being turned into something else.
Well, I guess I would respond to that saying, I hope it's not just decorative. Decorative art is fantastic, but I would hope it wasn't just decorative. Um,
No, I
yeah, yeah, I don't
yeah,
think
I
you
think
think that, but I think that is the mystery. In a way, because of the ending of the novel, why he chose to end it that way can be a problem. It can lead to interpretations we don't are not life affirming and not community based. It really can. But it gave it longevity. And it gives you that's what triggers this journey all over again to think about the novel is the fact of what happened. You know,
that could be the satire too, right? Like,
I think so. I
yeah,
think you're
it's a
right.
satire on the reader, right? And how they interpret.
Right. You want meaning. You want me to provide you this meaning, this journey. What am I, your dancing chicken? I'll give you all of this stuff like a steampunk art, and then you just figure it out. Which it kind of, I guess, writers do that sometimes. They don't have to explain their work. But it does go back to we don't need to have the author intent to appreciate and interpret it. But
No,
it
no.
is the novel. It's a novel that was really written at the end of that trend of looking at art and movies, of the auteur theory of writer's intent that had been dying out in France and interpretation in literary criticism just around that time. And so to have this novel come out then is kind of interesting too, historically, that it's almost in the face of that, you know, of that end of,
Yeah, the end of modernism in a way,
yeah.
like like some McCarthy has been called like a late modernist.
Hmm.
And so there is still that kind of modernist spirit of like art's potential to transform,
Yes.
society or something or itself, or even, whether, yeah, well, you're kind of saying, alchemy is a process of self-transformation, so the writing of it and the working through of all these problems is a kind of, do you think, is it a sort of way to
Absolutely. It's a form of
cope with that
practice and ritual.
situation?
I would say it's a form of practice and ritual. Absolutely. And I mean the hints now when we are laughing about Ignis Fatuus being in Hudibras coming from um
Answer.
yeah, and then thinking of Sidney as he's going to redo the pastoral. And when you think of pastoral novels, this is like a satire in some way, a very evil one. Evil because of that ending, you know.
Well, it's a evil satire, so it's like a Juvenalian savage satire rather than a gentle Horatian satire like The
There you go.
Simpsons. Like,
Like
but
The Simpsons?
yeah,
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 yeah. Hey,
uh,
by the way, I'm familiar with the Goddammit Holden because you were the one who pointed out to me that
yeah,
it's in the middle of the novel and it's right out of Catcher in the Rye.
yeah. Or that's what I was claiming back
Yeah,
in the
well, I
90s.
like it. He could have named this. Yeah, yeah, but Holden is a pretty unusual name, even though there was a real life Holden.
Or was there? I
Or
mean,
was there? We don't know. Yeah, we don't know.
there's not a lot of other references to a Judge Holden of Texas.
No. And that's the thing. There could have been somebody that he didn't remember their name. And that's why I said, could it have been him? And his confession is that he was actually that guy that was in
Yeah.
the thing.
So an oblique confession, sort of like Blood Meridian is.
That's a very interesting thing to do because again, it is that nihilism to reveal that and to leave it like that. It says a lot, but it also is the part that's like the satire, you know.
Well, to me, it's like an interrogative text. It judges the reader and
Hmm.
interrogates the reader. What do you believe of me?
Hmm. Hmm.
And your conclusions will actually reflect, maybe they will reflect on me a little, but they will also include you in that reflection.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So-
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
Hence all the, legal judgment,
Hmm.
all this sort of
Hmm.
motif that runs through.
Hmm. Very good point. Very good point. All right. How are we
Well,
doing here?
I think we're running out of steam.
I think we are, but that's a good thing. And I think we've got a good episode here, and we're really glad people are listening. We missed you out there, our imaginations of you maybe listening to our podcast. Okay, that's just me. That's just me then. No, I mean, really honestly, on Facebook, one of our listeners said, "Hey, I know it's due for the new. You must be making a podcast episode." I said, "Yeah, tomorrow." So thank you
Nice.
for
Yeah, thank
listening.
you. And
And
hopefully, like over the rest of the summer, we can become a little more regular. I think
yeah,
my
yeah,
workflow is changing a bit, so I
yeah.
can be more regular in our meetings and stuff.
Excellent. I look forward to it. And check out our Instagram page and our Substack page. If you did want to donate, it's free. But if you did want to, subscribe, you're certainly free to subscribe. And we would like to use that. Any donations go towards going to the Whitcliffe collection. That's my sales pitch for today. Thank you,
Thanks for listening.
JVH.
Thanks, Candy.
Oh, thank you. Talk to you later.
Yeah, talk to you later.